From the Foundation Studio right here on Biloxi's Back Bay, welcome to Super Talk Outdoors, where, as you well know by now, we celebrate the outdoors every single Monday at lunchtime because we've got world-class outdoors here in the state of Mississippi. And as you hear me say every single week, we're also the capital of the outdoors in America. I mean, when you think about all that we have available to us, whether it be in the Delta, Northeast Mississippi, and Central Mississippi, or here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, this is the capital of the outdoors. You're not going to find a collection of outdoor activities like we have here in Mississippi anywhere else in the United States. I can absolutely assure you that. I want to thank you for joining us on the powerful Super Talk Mississippi Radio Network, or on Super Talk TV at C Spire TV. But if you're listening on Facebook or YouTube or your favorite podcast, it's June 27th, 2022. You know, we had a fun-filled weekend this weekend, and as usually is the case for June each year, there's a lot of fishing involved. My friend Terry Waldrop, my son Jordan, and I did a kind of a last-minute trip. We really wanted to go offshore, but the more we assessed the deep water stuff, the really deep water stuff, it was going to be a bumpy weekend. So we decided kind of at the last minute to do a shallow reef trip right off Horn Island. Went to FH2, which is right past the 50-foot curve. And we really had a good day. We caught our limited snapper. We released 6 snapper and caught a limited snapper. It was kind of nice, kind of a low-key little trip to the reefs out there. And we also did some speck fishing around Horn Island. By the way, as it relates to our reefs, I love what we've done to our offshore reefs. The thing I would like to see more of, just more of it. You know, more reefs all over the place once you get past the 50-foot curve. I had the opportunity to be the president and publisher of the Mobile Press Register in Mobile, so I spent a lot of time there. And the reefs off of Alabama and the way they've done that are really incredible. Mississippi is starting to do really well in that arena as well. And just want to see more of it. I mean, we have again some of the best offshore fishing in the world right here off of Mississippi. Is quite incredible. By the way, don't forget that there's a requirement if you're going to go snapper fishing, and people tend to forget this. Don't forget it. One angler per boat has to report with the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources in a program they call their Tails and Scales system. And this is really important because if you don't do that, if you don't report that you're going and then, of course, log what you caught and what you released, the Marine Patrol officers who encounter you fishing for speckled trout, or for red snapper, or if you possess red snapper, without that trip authorization number, it could result in confiscation of your red snapper and also with some fines. When we got back, and as if that trip wasn't enough, Jordan, who we call the Fish Whisperer, went with my wife Ann and my granddaughter Mila, and they did some backwater fishing in Back Bay and caught a huge redfish. And then yesterday, Jordan and Mila go again, which again, typical weekend for the Matthews family. And Jordan actually caught a tagged redfish. And it's always cool when you catch a tagged fish. You get to find out, take the number off the tag and find out the history of the tag, et cetera. I'll share that on a future show. But anyway, fishing in coastal Mississippi is really on fire right now. It's a busy time of the year on the water, whether you're fishing the backwaters or offshore here in coastal Mississippi, or on lakes or rivers and bayous and other tributaries across the state of Mississippi. It's a really busy time of year. It's also super hot. I mean, we've got this dome of high pressure that's been sitting over us, and I don't think I remember a June where it's been so hot. My friend Terry said it feels like August offshore, and it really did. It really did. We've been in touch with our farmer friends, and they're having to do a lot of irrigation, and they're really worried about their crops. I mean, it's been a lot of work. They've been burning a lot of fuel trying to keep the irrigation systems going. Anyway, with all this in mind, with the 4th of July coming next weekend, I wanted to invite my friend Joe Spraggins, who's the executive director for the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, back to talk boater safety and fishing and shrimping and oystering and anything else that might be on Joe's mind. Anyway, without any further ado, let me invite my friend Joe back to Coast View. How you doing, Joe?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Rick.
It's good to see you. So where are you sitting right now this time?
I'm sitting in my office in my home.
Well, I see a lot of mementos in the background. I see some War Eagle back there. War Eagle, my friend.
There's quite a few of them War Eagles back there. But,
You're a
that's
big
okay.
Auburn
But
guy. My
hey,
son
hats
Justin.
off right off the bat to Ole Miss Rebels. I tell you what, we're proud of them.
Oh, no doubt. Good. Hey, man, super congratulations to the Ole Miss Rebels. Mississippi 2 years in a row. How about that, Joe?
That's amazing. And first time 64-1 from the number 64 team to the number 1 team.
Well, so interesting. My son Jordan said to me, Mississippi State had these bragging rights that were bestowed upon them last year, and it lasted 1 year because now Ole Miss has those bragging rights. But again, Southern Miss gets to the Super Regional. What a great year for baseball, college baseball for Mississippi. That's so awesome. And again, our Auburn our Auburn Tigers did pretty good as well. So from a fan perspective, we did pretty good this time, didn't we?
We did. We were well represented.
Hey, you heard me talk about snapper season and the reef programs that we're lucky to have access to in Mississippi. I'm so thrilled with what we've done with the reef programs. And people really use them. The snapper season is going pretty well this year, hasn't it?
It has done pretty well. We've caught about a third of our allocation as of last week. And so that's about on target of where we would normally be. It's obviously the cost to go out there is a little bit more than it was a year ago or 2 years ago, but people are still fishing, and we're looking at it. We'll keep the season open until midnight on July the 4th, and then we'll close at midnight, and we'll reassess where we're at, as we always do. We reassess it and see where we're at. Then we'll open the season back up because there will be allocations left. We're very sure of that. And we'll open it back up, and then we'll decide at that point, how do we do it? Do we do it on Friday, Saturday, Sunday only, or do we do all week? We'll look at it. We have so many people that come down here during the week, especially in August, July and August, that we don't want to jeopardize them and not being able to go out.
Yeah.
Just because they're not here over the weekend. And then plus we have a lot of our workers here that work in especially the casino world and other places that work on weekends and have the weekdays off. And so we want to give them that opportunity too.
So, there's a lot, we can break this down a little bit further. Just my personal observation, where I fished Saturday off of Horn Island, I didn't see nearly the number of boats I would normally see this time of year. And that may be that the early pressure on that particular reef was significant. I don't know, because I haven't been there every day to sort of measure all that. But on a Saturday, you would expect to find some of our markings. The beauty is that's a broad area at FH2, and of course each of the fish havens are similar to that kind of broad area, and I've got markings literally all over the place in that area. So as we find some of our better marks, we didn't have much competition for those marks coming on Saturday. Usually, last year, for example, we would have to kind of compete a little bit to get on top of some of that bottom structure. So what that tells me is, what you said is probably true, that it takes a lot of money to do what we did. I got 100 gallons of gas before I left. Didn't have an empty tank, but I got 100 gallons of gas, and it was $575 to just get 100 gallons of gas. And that's a lot of money. It requires a lot of sharing on most boats to make a trip like that work. The beauty of the shallow trips is that you don't have to go out as far. That's the beauty of those. It's not unusual for us to do a trip on a Saturday that we will do over 200 miles round trip, because we're going pretty deep. But I do think probably the gas situation's got people probably not going offshore as much. Is that what y'all are thinking as well?
Yes, and then some of them, they hold their trips out, and rather than do the shallow water trips, they'll go out to the FH13 and all down in the deeper water. They're catching a little bit bigger fish there.
Yeah.
So they just want to do it, and they're not taking as many trips. So they just take rather than take 4 trips in a time, they'll maybe take 2 and go out to the deeper water, and that's what they're looking at.
Yeah, one of my favorites, I'm looking at my map right now. I think it's FH7. Yeah,
Yeah.
FH7. We don't usually have a lot of competition at FH7 because,
Mhm.
it's a little bit further offshore. But gosh, man, we've done really well with our reefs. I just want to see more reefs. What's the current thinking on doing more?
We just spent quite a bit of money putting concrete reefs out in the FH13, and we just finished that. And then we sank a boat that the Hermits that the USM had this year, and we got two big boats that we're about to sink from Omega. And so that some of their boats that they've given us, and we're about to sink them. We're trying to build it. The one thing we have to be very careful of is our shrimpers. We don't want to hurt them either, though, and we want to still have that shrimp. And I tell you what, if you want to buy some shrimp, now's the time.
It is. We'll go talk about that here coming up in just a second. But we've got Joe Spraggins, who's the executive director for the Department of Marine Resources. And when we come back, we'll just kind of continue to cover the spectrum on what's going on in coastal Mississippi. We're also going to chat a little bit about
leading the conversation on Mississippi's outdoors. It's Super Talk Outdoors with Ricky Matthews on Super Talk Mississippi.
Welcome back to Super Talk Outdoors. I have my friend Joe Spraggins, who's the executive director for the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources. And when we went to break, we were talking about reefs. We got just a little bit more to say about that, and then we'll move on to the next program. But actually, the reality, Joe, is that we've seen a lot of the rigs off of coastal Mississippi. You have to go a lot deeper now to find rigs. Used to see oil rigs all over the place. During the Obama administration, they literally wouldn't let you keep any understructure. They were literally blowing them up. And I remember at one point we had one of our reporters who's a diver, who's a really great environmental reporter from Mobile, who went and studied sort of the aftermath of when they blew those rigs up and looking at all the dead, fish that it left behind. I'm really glad that we're really kind of back on a pattern of rigs to reef, because that's really the way to go, as you pointed out during the break, isn't it?
It is. The rigs do a great thing, and they're a great fishing area, when they're up. But we have a program called Rigs to Reef where they pay us to be able to, over the time, and then they turn around and make a reef out of it, but just kind of drop it into the Gulf. And it's a perfect idea to do that because it does give an infrastructure that we can use. And it makes it work, and everybody's used to being away from there anyway because that structure's there, and they don't want to be in that area for shrimpers and all in. So it works out fantastic, and I hope they'll allow us to continue to do this.
I hope so too. Because that's when you take the accumulation of sunken boats and other structure and these really cool concrete habitats and rigs to reef, all these things. They add to, again, make off of coastal Mississippi some of the best fishing in the world. By the way, I saw a few charter boats out there this past weekend. It's great to see people visiting this area, or maybe even locals, spending their money with great charter guys, and they're out there catching fish. It's just good to see. So it's the more the merrier, the way I look at it, that's for sure. So shrimp season, man, we haven't had the big rain, so that's had to have really been great for shrimping.
It is, and the shrimp are going, and they a lot of them are a lot larger than they normally have. The white shrimp are even still around, and so that's working. And I can tell you right now, the markets are pretty well saturated. And a lot of the big processors and all have so much that they have had over, that they couldn't sell during COVID, and they're just catching up on it. So if you want to buy from the dock, man, it is a good time. It is a good time to go down to the dock and buy some shrimp. And the price is very well. And I haven't seen this price in a long time. So, now's the time to stock up on some of your own private shrimp.
No doubt. We always like to put a little bit of shrimp away. That's for sure. And crabbing, Joe, crabbing is really good. We put our nets out a couple of weeks ago, and the collection, once we got to the end of the week, we probably had about 5 dozen. We were able to cull through them and keep the largest ones. But the collection of crabs was as big as we've seen in many, many, many years, man. I mean, it was just beautiful. And meaty, I might add, as well. I mean, we had a great crab boil. But you're hearing that as well, aren't you? I
am. And, everybody thought after the Bonnie Carey in 2019 that it would devastate the crabs, but it did not. They were able to come back. They're kind of a seasonal thing, and they were able to come back, and the shrimp has come back. The oysters are still, we're fighting, but they're coming. We're getting, the last couple of years we hadn't had no Bonnie Carey and so it's good, going good, and we're able to rebuild those oyster reefs, and hopefully this time next year we'll be talking a lot of oysters, but I don't know, we'll see.
Well, generally, the Mississippi Sound is an incredibly resilient body of water. We know this. We've seen it over and over and over. Certainly, Katrina tested us. The Bonnie Carey spillway tested us too much. But given where oysters grow, you've got to have the right salinity, the right mix. You can't have too much pollution. A lot of pollution came from the Bonnie Carey spillway. But you give it a little time, it comes back, and it will come back strong. And hopefully we won't have the kind of Bonnie Carey scenario that we had a couple of years ago. But the reality is, Joe, until they come up with a resolution for that, I think it's just going to be something we have to fight every few years, whether we like it or not. It's unfortunate, but that's the truth, isn't it?
It is, and we got to understand too, we made it. God did. Yeah. We made it, and this is something that we tried to alter the way nature operates. And in turn, we got to suffer for that point. But we can work it out. We can do some things. We are looking at some stuff north of Bonnie Carey. There is a diversion called the Union Diversion and the Alma Diversion that are north of the Bonnie Carey. And when the water gets to the level where it would have to open up the Bonnie Carey, they can open them up. And it only 25,000 cubic feet to the east and 50,000 cubic feet, and this is per second, to the west. But it will at least trickle it down enough to maybe where we don't have to open up the Bonnie Carey as much. So that's something we're looking at very hard. This is not a done deal. This is something that's going to be years down the road, but we are looking at it, and we're trying to find out what's going to happen. And if it's possible and we can get the Corps to fund it and be able to do it, it would be a great thing. But if it's not possible, we understand.
Well, one day we'll spend some time more on this subject on Super Talk Outdoors so that people across the state can understand it. But, the Mississippi River is powerful, and people are concerned about the Merganza and whether it's going to be that particular spillway, whether it's structurally sound, and all the discussions and debates around that. But just in a summary, the Bonnie Carey spillway gets opened up to protect the New Orleans, sends all of that river water with its pollutants and from multiple states across the United States into the Mississippi Sound. Of course, it goes into the Lake Pontchartrain and then the Lake Borgne and then into the Mississippi Sound. And that Mississippi Sound was not made to have that amount of water come into it. And until we can come up with a fix for that, this will be something we're gonna have to deal with. Anyway, let's shift gears a little bit. Boater safety, I cannot overstate how important that is. You got a lot of people out on the water, a lot of experienced boaters, but then again, there's a lot of inexperienced boaters. I passed some of them going out. We were coming back in, they were going out, but boats that shouldn't be offshore were headed to Horn Island. And that's got to scare you to death this time of year to see the number of inexperienced boaters on the water.
It does, and the other thing is people don't understand that those waves, whenever those waves get up just a little bit, a smaller boat like that can't take them, and they get flustered by what's happening and the wave popping on them, and it pops water over into them, and it's very, very, very unsafe, and and just because your boat will run fast doesn't mean you have to do it, and that's two things you can do here. You can be safe if you'll drive it a little slower, and you can save a lot more fuel if you'll drive it a little slower. So, it can be beneficial for everybody. But just if people would just think about themselves and think, and take a little bit of time and say, okay, I don't have to be at this little island over here in 5 minutes. I get there in 10 minutes, I'm all right. It ain't going to hurt anything. And plus enjoy, if you go a little slower, and you go through there, you're not going to have a chance of hitting someone or running up on somebody, a skier or anybody that's fell in the water, especially in the back bays. And you're not going to have that, and you're not going to have a problem. But also, you get to see the scenery a little bit more.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. Hey, Joe, one of the thing I've always done, I think it makes a real difference. When I encounter another boat, and say a boat's coming toward me, I just do kind of a wide arc. I just try to stay away from other boats. I don't want to pass close to other boats unless I absolutely have to. I don't try to tease them. I don't try to, if I have the bigger boat, I don't try to say I'm the bigger boat, so you can go around me. No, I do everything in my power to stay away from other boats. I don't care. Sea-Doos, I stay away from them as well. That's we've been lucky. We hadn't had, unless you know something I don't know, we haven't had a deadly boat accident in a while. But this coming weekend is a time you really got to reconcentrate on safety. That's for sure, isn't it?
It is, and there'll be more boaters if the weather's beautiful. There'll be more boaters on the water. Like I said, they may not go out as much, but they'll have those times. And this is a weekend that they will try to go out. The families are together, and everybody's wanting to enjoy life and have a good time. And the worst thing in the world is somebody to have an accident or someone get killed on a holiday like this. And we see it so much on the highways and other ways. So if we can just please be safe on the water, we'd appreciate it.
I would tell people, be sure, check your battery, make sure you got a good, healthy battery in your boat. Make sure your bilge pumps are operating properly. Make sure everyone's got a personal flotation device, especially young people. It makes me crazy when I see in another boat a young kid with an adult life jacket on. That's not going to save them if they have a bad accident, and things can go to heck in a handbasket quickly, can't they, Joe?
They can, and think about there's all type of safety equipment that you should have, and especially if you're going offshore, you have to have some form of flares or something that some way of it's there for your own safety. It's there in case something happens to you that we can get to you, that we have a way to see it and get to you. So take your time and go back and do exactly what you said. And every child must have a life preserver.
Yeah. Hey, listen, let me say this last thing. We got less than a minute left. Drinking and boating don't mix. I see lots of people at Horn Island and Ship Island and, at the various sandbars along the river, and the operator of the boat is having too much to drink. That's when things really can go bad when you drink. So whether you're boating here in coastal Mississippi or anywhere across the state, take a few minutes and just remind yourself. Do a search on boater safety and just remind yourself how to keep the people in your boat and yourself safe. This is that sort of a weekend. A lot of inexperienced boat. Look out for the other guy. Have a great weekend. Thank you, Joe. Appreciate you, man.
Oh, thank you, and I appreciate y'all. Everybody have a safe 4th of July.
We'll see you on the other side. We'll continue the conversation and talk about a migratory bird banding when we come back.
Drive safely.
Super Talk Outdoors. I really enjoyed that conversation with Joe Spraggins. And as I said, but the last time we talked, this is a man who's gone through so many iterations in his life. It's truly amazing. He was a brigadier general in the National Guard. And then, we have a position, emergency services position down here on the coast that is the old civil defense role. But he was in that role, head of the emergency services for Harrison County when Katrina hit. So you can only imagine the role that he had before Katrina and then after Katrina. And then, he could have long since rode off into the sunset, but instead he goes and becomes the executive director for the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources. And, he and I joked that, we sort of represent a part of the population that's always going to, I think, seek to reinvent themselves. I'm retired, but I'm still enjoying doing this show and my show on the coast called Coast View. It's been terrific. And for people who are regular listeners to the show, and that if you're just listening for the first time today, what you'll know in me is that I'm going to give you what I've got. And one of the things that I have is an incredible love for the outdoors in the state. And I've had the real, I don't know, honor, pleasure of having the opportunity to have hunted literally all over this state. And I've seen it all. Grew up fishing off the coast of Mississippi. And when we get the opportunity to visit with Joe Spraggins and have the conversation that he and I just had, it's really awesome. But we're going to shift gears now, and I'm going to move over to Houston Havens, who's the waterfowl program coordinator for the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. He's been on the show before. He's someone, when I saw his name pop up on the list as the next person that I'm going to be spending some time with, I thought to myself, wow, we should have had him back already, because the waterfowl program, they're not just busy during hunting season. In fact, hunting season is kind of when take a little bit of a break, I would bet, and do a little bit of hunting on themselves. But this is a busy time of the year for these guys. So without any further ado, let me welcome my friend Houston back to Super Talk Outdoors. How you doing, buddy?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
It's good to see you. Where are you right now?
I'm in our Jackson office headquarters here today, so going to do this interview and then get right back to it. Like you said, it's a busy time of year.
Well, look, I always say that some of the best conversations happen when we're out the air, but it was a good sort of window into some of the conversations that you and I are going to have. There's a lot going on this time of year. The waterfowl program in particular is doing banding. We'll talk about the mourning dove as well. I didn't think about the mourning dove when it came to banding program. We'll come back to that in just a second. But man, the heat is wreaking havoc across the state. Farmers are pulling their hair out these days, aren't they?
They are, like we were talking about before the show. We work with a lot of farmers, as working with private landowners across the state of Mississippi, and so we're seeing a lot of the hardships. They're doing what they can to irrigate if they have lands that are irrigatable, and just really trying to make it through this early summer. It seems like we're having. Don't know what July and August is going to look like, but we're off to a pretty hot start.
Well, if you go to the Mississippi Delta today, all you got to do is just listen, and that hum you hear are those pumps. And they're burning a lot of natural gas and diesel right now, trying to keep those fields irrigated. And hopefully we can get back into a summer pattern, getting some afternoon thunderstorms or showers at least. I know the farmers could use a break. They've been out there irrigating for much longer than they normally would for this time of the year. So anyway, coming back to you guys, you really do. People think of waterfowl, they think of the winter, but you guys are busy really year round. What's happening this time of year for you guys, Houston?
Sure. So most of what's happening basically as soon as the season ends, we're starting to get out and visit with private landowners. Of course, we do a lot of work with public lands because our agency has a lot of public lands that we manage for public use, but do a great deal of work with private landowners. Most of the state of Mississippi is privately owned, and so we're getting out looking at areas maybe where they're wanting to improve wetland habitat for the next coming year, because things are starting back, as soon as the duck season ends, we go through the rest of the winter, and then springtime is coming around and the growing season starts right back. And so being on top of that habitat management, having a game plan going into the following year is a really big part of overall wetland habitat management. And so we're doing a lot of that. And then as we'll talk about later, getting into the kind of the midsummer, doing a lot of banding of our resident migratory birds that we have here in Mississippi.
Yeah, that's right. I'm curious about last year, first of all, and you can comment about last year to the extent that you want to, where you had such a dry, waterfowl season. Unless you were pumping water or near, large bodies of water, there was a lot of dry land. Of course, on some of the public land, you guys did a really good job. Does it increase the challenges coming into the next year, or is it just business as usual and you're just hoping for a sort of a wetter season?
It's kind of business as usual. Definitely what I've learned in my career here is every year is going to be a little bit different. And with wetland habitat management, the slight changes in weather or timing of when things get dry or when, things get wet can impact, the success of what you're trying to do there. But every year has its different set of challenges or advantages maybe. And so we're just trying to deal with what Mother Nature gives us right now and go into this coming season as best we can. So
how do you characterize last season if you take out the areas that were completely dry and just look at areas where people had good habitat for a typical duck season? Did you find that they had pretty good hunts, or that overall the hunts were the duck hunting or the duck taking was down considerably?
Yeah, I would say early season, especially last year, we did see pretty good success. Like you said, things were dry, and so the areas that either were natural wetland habitat, like our permanent, semi-permanent wetlands, Tupelo breaks, things like that, those areas seemed to have pretty good success early. We had right about average duck numbers to start the season, at least, which is, not a significantly high number from where we, usually get to by peak numbers in January, but at least to start the season, duck numbers numbers were about average, and then having those areas that either had reliable wetland habitat in those break type situations or areas that could pump water did have some good success. We had several wildlife management areas that had really good success, and we saw really high use of that from the public, of course, because maybe they had areas that they were waiting on rainfall before they could hunt, either places that they owned or were leasing from private landowners. And so we definitely met a need with public lands last year.
Yeah, that's awesome, and I heard great reports from the public land as well. Hey, so let's talk about, you mentioned resident ducks, so essentially wood ducks. You guys are involved in a pretty aggressive banding program. You're literally capturing them and banding them and charting them. Give us a little sense of the process and what you're learning from that.
Yeah, so some people may not know what goes on or what the process of banding is, but what we're talking about there is, like you said, we're capturing ducks that are residents here in the state of Mississippi that are either breeding or were recently hatched here, and putting an aluminum, in this case, putting an aluminum leg band on the birds, similar to like a bracelet that you would wear, recording some biological information on those birds, and then releasing them back to the wild. And what the goal there is to get basically a representative sample of the actual population that's out there, that's being produced and is resident here of the state of Mississippi, so that we can hopefully get some returns from those birds, mostly through hunter harvest. When a hunter harvests a bird with a leg band on it, it's kind of a trophy, or it is a trophy for them to do that. But it's also very important information that we get back biologically from those birds.
So you're literally putting grain on the edge of water, and you're literally firing a net. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, for wood ducks, that's what we're working on right now. July 1st, which is Friday, it's coming up pretty quickly, will be the first day that we'll attempt to do some wood duck banding. And yeah, so we're the last couple of weeks going out and scouting some sites, doing some preparation to be able to set up a rocket net. But basically, what we're looking for is a clean surface right next to the water. We like to be able to get those birds coming to an area over and over before we move in and set up the equipment to try to trap them. So basically, we're putting out some weed along the edge of the water, putting out a trail camera, trying to get good intel on when birds are coming there, how many are coming there, so we can kind of maximize our time and our effort to move a crew there. And when it all works out for wood ducks, we're getting there well before daylight in the morning, being sure our net is set up, everything's good to go electrically, wired to the charges in the rocket nets. And then if it all works out, birds will show up pretty early in the morning before it gets too bad hot, and we'll fire the net over them, pull them out, put them in a holding crate, and then start working through the birds one at a time, identifying the sex and age of the bird, putting a band on them, recording that number, and releasing them back to the wild.
Well, that's so interesting. Look, do you use cellular cameras?
We don't a whole lot, because we're having to go back to these sites and refresh the bait anyway periodically, so we don't go long spans of time, but it's very, very useful to be able to do that, and we could do that. We just don't currently use them. So
when you're checking those cards, I mean, you think about deer hunters checking cards or having cell cameras and how excited it is to sort of understand what the situation is. As a waterfowl expert, it's still got to be exciting sometimes when you look at those cards and you think, wow, man, we're doing well here.
That's right. Obviously we're looking for large numbers of ducks getting up on the bait and being in a catchable area. It's there's a lot of days that we sit in that blind waiting to try to capture, and we see a lot of birds, but kind of like hunting, it doesn't always work out exactly the way you need it to. And so that's obviously the main thing we're looking for. But we see a lot of really neat things on those photos as well.
We'll come back to see what else you see on those photos in just a second. This is Houston Havens. He's the waterfowl program coordinator for the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. When we get on the other side, we'll talk about what he sees on those cards, and we'll also talk about mourning dove banding as well. We'll see you after this break.
We live in one of the best places in America to enjoy the outdoors. So let's talk about it. It's Super Talk Outdoors with Ricky Matthews on Super Talk Mississippi.
Welcome back to Super Talk Outdoors. I told Houston Havens, who's the waterfowl program coordinator for the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks, that I got to put a star by his name and come back to him a little bit more often, because well, first of all, he's really good at what he does, and he's great on the radio. But I enjoy really our chats, both on air and off air. He's terrific. Hey, you mentioned that when you check those cards, you're positioning the grain in probably multiple locations to try to figure out when you deploy your nets to capture and band wood ducks that you want to make sure that they're coming back repeatedly to the same areas, and you're having to go and refresh the grain, et cetera, et cetera. But when you check those cards, what all do you see?
Well, similar to trail cameras where people are trying to do deer scouting and things like that, of course, you don't just get deer on there, and that definitely applies to where we're trying to get wood ducks on site. We see things like great blue herons that'll come up, and stand at a bait site trying to capture something to eat. Of course, deer, raccoons will visit the bait sites as well. And then we see things that we don't necessarily want to see, like wild hogs coming up, things that are often a disturbance that might make ducks a little bit uncomfortable, like a hog or an alligator nearby, can kind of play into the challenges of being able to have a successful capture event.
Yeah, I can imagine. We capture some interesting things on our cams from time to time as well. So let's shift gears and we'll go over to the mourning dove, because I really didn't consider the fact that you guys would want to study them just as much as you would any other. So talk about that one.
Yeah, so, a lot of the information that's valuable to us as wildlife biologists is seeing what of our representative population that we banded and released back to the wild is being harvested or being, recaptured in, subsequent years, things like that. And also, when a hunter harvests a bird that's banded, of course, they are able to go on the website that's on that band to report that information. That's how we get the information back to the biologist. But it's really neat for the hunter to be able to see maybe where that bird was banded, how long ago it was banded, some really cool information like that for them. But yeah, as far as dove trapping, quite a bit different from our wood duck trapping. We use what we call funnel traps. It's just a wire trap. And so we start by pre-baiting again, getting birds used to coming on to, small, about the size of a pie plate or something, bait site. And once we get birds using those baits, we have the trap laying next to it, not set, just so they can kind of get used to being near the trap. And then we'll place the trap over the bait. And essentially how it works is birds can walk through a funnel, but they can't figure out how to walk back out of it. And so it's kind of an activity where you need to be around the local area, see the birds go in, and then, not leave them in there very long, be able to pull them out, identify them, and get the band on them, release them pretty quickly.
Over the years, what have you learned about mourning dove? That's got to be very interesting, because I always envision that once they find a field they like, they just kind of stay there. But what about range, and what's some interesting data that you gathered?
Yeah, so with mourning doves, we do have, as you mentioned, a great deal of them are harvested fairly locally. Even several years after they've been banded, a lot of our birds will be harvested back here in Mississippi. But we do have some really interesting band returns from all the birds we banded. I think the furthest that we've had for doves traveling as far as being marked here in Mississippi was a dove band return we had in North Carolina. And it seems like probably more of our traveling outside of the state birds go toward the east for whatever reason that is, kind of up the East Coast. But, if you were to look at a map of all of our band returns over the years for doves, it kind of just looks like a shotgun, across the Southeast and even outside the Southeast.
I just didn't consider that they would fly that. I mean, we should have. They're like any other bird. They're going to have some type of pattern that involves migration. Sure. But that's really interesting. I mean, what do you get from it? What do we hope that these learnings will lead to in terms of, more birds and et cetera?
Yeah, so like I said, one of the biggest things is being able to assess the population, to be able to assess harvest rates, because a lot of that information is what plays into setting seasons, the number of days in a season, the bag limits, things like that. They're not just, arbitrary numbers that, we think we can, sustain this. There has to be some science feeding into that system to back it up. And so being able to look at that, the harvest rates on that banded population really feeds into that overall process. But a lot of the movement stuff is really interesting, especially with wood ducks. One of the things that we find with them is when we get a band return that is way far away from Mississippi, like I'm talking into the southern provinces of Canada, even for wood ducks sometimes. Most of the time, what we're going to see there is that it was a juvenile male that was going into its first season in Mississippi, its first fall or winter, and pairing with a female that was from another area like that. And so basically, they're forming their pair bonds while they're going through the wintertime here in Mississippi. And when she leaves to go back where she came from, he's going to follow right there behind her. It's just really interesting how that works.
That is so interesting to me. I think of a wood duck staying on that lake, just getting born on that lake and staying on that lake. The thought that some go to southern Canada because of the mating process is that's a new one for me. But Houston, we're out of time. It has been a pleasure. Like I said, we'll have you back more often. The duck discussion is something that a lot of outdoorsmen are super interested in. Anyway, so this has been Houston Havens, the Waterfowl Program Coordinator for the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. Have a great day, Houston.
Thank you. You too.
And as usual, as always, stay safe, especially this coming busy time on the water. We'll see you.